Tell us the one about the guy in the white mask.
Again?
Okay. There's this girl named Lori, a high school student, on a roll, shy around boys. She got this job, babysitting a couple kids. It was supposed to be $20 for pizza and cable and long talks on the telephone with her friends who were supposed to also be babysitting. She wasn't one really to listen to a lot of radio or to turn on the news on television, so she hadn't heard about the escaped maniac institution, the insane. It was Halloween night, and she didn't know. I have to be honest, the first thing I want to discuss about Halloween 3 is not quite what I go over in these videos. It's this really strange feeling I've had for a long time that something's wrong with my brain about Halloween 3. Because I remember the film coming out, I can remember TV spots playing on television, well, where else would TV spots play, announcing the film. I remember it coming out, and I remember the immediate few years afterwards, the reaction. And I was young, but I was very much already into horror by this point. The thing is, if you talk to people, you'll hear that Halloween 3 was hated upon release. And I don't think that's quite accurate. The reality is, Halloween 3 didn't really get much notice at all when it came out. It was a film that came out and was gone very quickly. I'd say it's probably likely that as many people read the novelization that was out before the movie came out than actually went to go see the film in theaters, because I talked to people who'd read the book a lot more than I talked to people who'd seen the movie. But, my memory can be flawed, so I went back and actually kind of investigated to see if my thoughts of what happened 37 years ago were anywhere near reality, or if the mythology about this film being hated because it was different was really that accurate. And as it turns out, if you go back to the initial reviews, they were actually pretty kind to this movie. The violence was definitely called out as being inappropriate, and violence towards children was always controversial. But the movie actually was kind of respected, and inside the horror genre, it was weird. There would always be a caveat, an asterisk if you would, that this doesn't have anything to do with Michael Myers' butt. But the movie had, right from the beginning, a pretty strong cult following that was separate but equal to the two films that came before it. And it was really common to hear people say that they liked it more than the second film. Because again, as the revisionist history has gone, the second film actually was not really well regarded for many years after its release. So I find it interesting that this film was released, had an okay response from people who saw it, just not enough people did go see it, but then at some point started to get the reputation as having been spurned. But then once the later VHS years and companies like Anchor Bay were out, this film started being reevaluated. Although I think for many, it was just going back to their original impressions of the movie, because again, I just didn't see the hate for this movie. More recently, generation after generation has come up and discovered the movie, and all claiming that they're the generation that finally are championing this movie. And Halloween 3 has had so many generations championing it, and all pretending that there's this abundance of people out there that didn't like the movie. I'm not saying there aren't people who didn't like the movie and have changed their mind. I'm not saying that there aren't people who didn't like the movie then and don't like it now. But it never was as controversial as, say, the fifth Friday the 13th film, or any of the later Nightmare on Elm Street films. Halloween 3 was always thought of as separate and not really part of the overall Myers story, which it's not. But it was always kind of well regarded by at least the core horror audience, which were vocal about it. I never heard anyone just trash the movie. I can think of a dozen films that came out in the 80s that people think of now as really, really great films that were kind of slagged back then. Halloween 3 isn't one of them. Now take that for what it is. I don't expect you to change your history with this film or how you think of your history with this film just because of my experiences. But do yourself a favor, go back and read some of those reviews from back in the day. You'll be pretty surprised that this film was not as hated as everyone claims it was. Now, Halloween 3 is a big departure from the previous two films because it's not a slasher film. It does borrow a lot of slasher film imagery, but it is a completely different story. It's a much more ambitious story, and it really was probably more in tune with what would have been healthy for the late 80s had this film actually pushed the envelope like the first Halloween did. Instead, in a few years, Michael Myers would be back, and the horror genre had a slow slide into the 90s horror drought because of it. In large part because how many times can you go back to the same well? Halloween 3 does not go anywhere near that well. It's drinking entirely different water. And as brave as the film is, it was hard to get traction because there was just so many horror films on the market. It got lost in the shuffle, which is a damn shame. Thematically, however, I have news for you. Thematically, Halloween 3 is very much a sequel to Halloween 1 and 2. The basic storytelling ingredients are almost identical to what had been developed in the first two films. Not to mention a lot of the aesthetics remain. We have kind of faceless, robotic killers who, in human form, who are later revealed to not be solely human. We have the theme of sacrifice, which is, spoilers, the big plot of the film is a worldwide mass genocide of children to atone for us turning away from the old ways. That is really very much in line with the concepts of Sawe that we saw in Halloween 2 especially, but even just the general themes of a society in decline, forcing itself to redeem itself through bloodshed, which is something that is low-key but present in the original film. Both films are about doctors trying to heal the society, not just a patient. And they're both doctors who have failed. Dr. Chalice can't keep patients from being assassinated in his own hospital. Dr. Loomis couldn't save Michael Myers from the evil within him or stop him from going back out into the world and claiming more victims. And they carry one other theme as well, which is that it's about protecting the children again. These Halloween masks being made by Silver Shamrock are children's novelties, and children are the ones that are going to wear them and be affected. The key scene that everyone talks about, where the child's head becomes mush inside of a Halloween mask, and bugs and snakes crawl out. It's meant to directly say, this is what happens when we don't take care of our children. This is it. Because we're all the caretakers. We're all the babysitters like Laurie was. But will we step up? Early in the film, when Chalice goes back to his estranged family, the kids are very accepting of him, but they're very dismissive of his gifts to them. It's a very estranged, modern family. It's broken, right? And what are the kids doing when he goes to visit them? They're watching the television, because the television has become the babysitter. That's a major theme of this film, and that's one of the failings that needs to be addressed by this sacrifice. Silver Shamrock is really trying to bring the world back to a time, through pain, through bloodshed, in which, we take care of ourselves as a society, and we please the gods. Much like Cabin in the Woods, the gods is really meant in a very meta way. And although they're not talking about the audience quite as explicitly when they say the old gods or the ancient ways, as they do in Cabin in the Woods, they are nevertheless still talking about you and me and our role in society. We're supposed to be protecting the children, but we've abandoned them to television sets and prefabbed Halloween masks. Much like Dawn of the Dead, there's also an anti-consumerist attitude that's in Halloween 3. It kind of suggests that we're putting this value on children, that what they own is who they are. And that's why that they have to have the special toy at Christmas, or in this case, this special mask for the big giveaway on Halloween. We constantly see the same television commercial and we hear the same jingle because we've replaced the babysitter as a person with a television set that's selling unhealthy things to our kids. And if they continue down this road, they're doomed as an entire generation. That's what the movie is saying. And that's not really so different than the original two Halloweens. We just replaced Michael Myers with an idea. Colonel Cochran is not even really the villain of the piece. He's kind of just a placekeeper for the villain. The villain is this idea that we have fundamentally failed our future, that we are now a media-driven society that really doesn't have any values beyond what we're told to have by that glowing box in the living room. And that's why Halloween 3 is a fascinating work, because of course most of us encountered this film not on a movie screen but on a television screen. Whether it was during the cable broadcast, which wasn't me, whether it was by television broadcast, or whether it was on video cassette, we saw it through the exact medium that it is criticizing, which gives it an absurd amount of resonance and makes us feel a little bit uneasy about what we're watching. The film isn't scary in the same paranoid manner as Halloween is, and it's not quite the, exploitation thrill ride of the second film. Instead, we feel a little bit like we're watching something that is a little bit uncomfortable, but very personal. It's a strangely alluring movie. Mostly because I think it is talking about my generation and all the generations that came later who really did grow up with what we watched on a television screen. And as we buy some special edition of this movie on 4K or Blu-ray or whatever format might be in the future, even if that's just an Ultra 8K stream, we're still going to be consuming this movie and still valuing this movie based on the format delivering it to us. And that is a fairly amazing thing for a film in the early 80s to even have considered, let alone put out there. It's nearly prophetic. Now, the limitation of this reading of Halloween 3 is this. Although this movie is a great watch, and although I would say it's one of the great horror films of the 1980s, it is admittedly a film that hasn't aged as well as Halloween 1 or 2. Mostly because we tend to roll our eyes because the world didn't end as the movie suggests. We didn't lose an entire generation to the television set. But the warning is still important because we might not have all been lying on the trash heap of history in some genocidal mass of writhing flesh. But what did happen is we stopped going outside. We stopped playing tree tag in the front yard as children. And instead of going house to house trick-or-treating, they now go trunk-or-treating in the safest possible environment. Or worse, they go store to store in a shopping mall. Halloween 3 is to me a thoughtful, provocative horror film that, while not 100% successful, is way better than most of what we've gotten since. Is it a perfect film? No. I could probably pick out a half dozen problems with the movie, but none of those drag it down. The movie has a great spirit, a great tone, a great atmosphere, and it knows its limitations. It knows it's telling a sort of fairy tale. This isn't the campfire legend this time. This is a social criticism that's more cerebral. It's sad that the series would detour, and instead of telling stories like this, would become the slasher formula again and again and again. But in a way, if you think about it, the fact that that happened this series kind of proves this movie's point. We continue as fans to continue to sit down in front of that glowing screen and watch a barely tweaked, barely remodeled version of a film that came out in 1978 play over and over and over and over as the years go by. That can't be particularly good for us. Halloween 3 is an exclamation point at the end of a statement we didn't know needed to be made. But I'm extraordinarily thankful that there was filmmakers who knew enough to say it.